Well, I think we do have a quorum, so I think we should get going. Good afternoon, everyone. Here on an absolutely gorgeous day in Washington. For those of you who are in Washington, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Spring is finally coming. We're very pleased about that. But I also want to give a very good morning to our participants from Asia and a good evening to our participants from South America. We truly have a global audience today. Thanks all for joining us for what promises to be a very important and timely conversation regarding post-pandemic recovery, shifting supply chains, and considerations for increasing economic cooperation between Latin America and the Caribbean, North America, and Japan. My name is Eric Farnsworth, and I head the Washington office of the Council of the Americas and the Americas Society, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to launch our discussions today. Just looking at the newspapers from today, including the front page above the fold from the Washington Post, one gets a sense that Latin America and the Caribbean are in a deepening crisis related to the pandemic, even as vaccines come online and become more readily available around the world. But there's also some good news on that front from countries like Chile and Uruguay and elsewhere, and with continued hard work and probably some good luck too, the worst of the pandemic will hopefully be soon behind the region. But what will it leave, and what will we find? A region that has suffered its worst economic contraction in over 100 years, with the IMF predicting that per capita GDP will not return to 2019 levels until 2025, with higher debt loads and social cleavages further exposed, a decade of poverty reduction already being lost, all as a new election cycle has already begun. So collectively, we have our work cut out for us. Fortunately, though, in the wake of the pandemic, political and business leaders alike have come to understand even more acutely the importance of international supply chain resiliency for economic well-being at home. The region now has an enormous opportunity to position itself even more as a vital, indeed integral part of global supply chains. And I would argue that this is not just an opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, but also a necessity if Latin America and the Caribbean hope to improve their overall standing in the global economy and not fall further behind other emerging market competitors. This will also require a paradigm shift for the United States and our private sector, a look anew at the regional opportunities that exist, many with nations that already enjoy a freer trade relationship with the United States and Japan and others. And like Brazil and Uruguay, some others as well seek to build those relationships and connections coming out of COVID. After the pandemic, in fact, our ambitions must extend beyond a mere return to pre-COVID conditions. Rather, we must, to coin a phrase, build back better. With this in mind, at least one country is looking around the corner to see what the opportunities for further cooperation might be: Japan. In fact, Japan shares a long history of friendship and economic cooperation with Latin America and the Caribbean. And so our program today will begin with a keynote presentation by Ambassador Teiji Hayashi, the Assistant Minister for the LAC Bureau at the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. His biography and those of the panelists to follow are available if you open the chat function on the screen. As well, there will be an opportunity at the end of the panel for audience participants to ask questions. And we would ask you to send a chat to me, the presenter, and we'll put you in the queue in order to open your mic and give you an opportunity to ask the question upon being recognized. Ambassador Hayashi has extensive experience in the region, as well as significant leadership roles in international trade and financial matters. He also has served a tour of his Foreign Service career in Beijing. As you will note from his bio, he is supremely qualified for his current position, and it's a privilege for the Council of the Americas and for me personally to host him today. Mr. Ambassador, I really want to thank you personally for joining us, for being available from Tokyo, and really want to tell you how much we're looking forward to hearing your comments and to engaging with you in the Q&A portion after the panel discussion. So, Mr. Ambassador, thank you again for joining us here at the Council of the Americas. Over to you for your keynote remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Farnsworth, and good afternoon or evening to everybody. Well, I'm Hayashi Teiji, Assistant Minister for the Latin American and the Caribbean Affairs Bureau of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Japan. I'm in charge of diplomatic relations and the political economic affairs between Japan and Latin America. So I'm very honored to speak here on the relationship between Japan and Latin America, also with the United States. Since I joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs 30 years ago, I have been engaged many times in work related to Latin America. And I'd like to first express my appreciation to Mr. Farnsworth, Vice President of Haar, and other core staff and members for giving me this opportunity. Today, in this keynote speech, I'd like to speak on 3 points. First, the basic relationship between Japan and Latin America. Second, a free and open international order in this region. Third, economic partnership and green and digital cooperation. So let me start. First of all, I'd like to explain the relation between Japan and Latin America, which are on the opposite side of the Earth, especially focusing on today's theme, the supply chain. And in recent years, a large number of Japanese companies have set operations in this region, conducting businesses in cooperation with the local community and developing together with the region. Now, the number of Japanese companies operating in Latin America amounts to almost 3,000. In particular, the automobile industry has made a remarkable inroads into the region, with most of Japanese major automobile companies such as Toyota, Nissan, and Honda operating locally, and the region is now an indispensable manufacturing basis for Japanese automobile industry. In addition, the Panama Canal, a major transportation route connecting Japan with east coast of the United States, one of Japan's major markets, is also located in the Latin American region, making it extremely important from a geopolitical perspective. In recent years, Japan has been importing LNG from the United States through the Panama Canal, which makes Central American countries more important from the perspective of Japan's energy security. In addition, there are more than 2 million Japanese immigrants and their descendants, known as Nikkei, in Latin America, serving as a bridge between the 2 regions. The COVID-19 pandemic is affecting the entire world, including Japan and Latin American countries. And Japanese companies operating in this region are no exception. Mexico forms a part of the supply chain for the North American automobile industry formed around the United States. In the first half of last year, the suspension of production activities in Mexico, including those of Japanese companies, due to the coronavirus pandemic, affected the automotive industry in the United States, which is still fresh in our memories. In order to overcome the challenges posed by the novel coronavirus, we have an increased need for international cooperation, especially with like-minded countries. more than ever before. And Japan intends to cooperate with the United States and Latin American countries. Although international movements of people is still limited, we have been holding a political dialogue with Latin American countries via online tools. In addition, as a part of our support for coronavirus countermeasures, we have already provided more than $7 million in medical equipment to 20 Latin American countries, and have contributed approximately $3 million to the Pan American Health Organization, PAHO, for the provision of medical equipment as well. Furthermore, using the Japanese trust fund, which Japan contributed to the IDB, the Inter-American Development Fund, Japan has provided approximately $8 million to Latin American countries for capacity building in the field of health and medical care. That's the provision of medical supplies. Secondly, I'd like to explain Japan's view on the importance of a free and open international order as the basis for a stable supply chain in Latin America. In 2014, when the Prime Minister Abe visited this region, Japan announced a 3 guidelines principle for its diplomacy with Latin America, so-called juntos or juntos. Progress together, be together, and inspire together. These 3 principles. And in 2018, as a next step, we announced the initiative to enhance 3 connectivities: economic connectivity of values, and the connectivity of wisdom with Latin American countries. Based on these ideas or guiding principles, Japan will continue to work with Latin American countries that share fundamental values to maintain and expand a free and open international order based on the rule of law. Last January, Foreign Minister Motegi visited Latin America for the first time since assuming his post. One of the major outcomes of the visit was that we were able to confirm with each Latin American country our cooperation in maintaining and strengthening a free and open international order. One of the priorities of Japan's current diplomacy is to promote a free and open Indo-Pacific, so-called FOI. This is a specific effort to maintain and strengthen a free and open international order, also in cooperation with the United States. Japan has been cooperating with the United States and other like-minded countries, like India and Australia, in realizing the point by first promoting and establishing fundamental principles such as the rule of law, freedom of navigation, and free trade. Second, pursuing economic prosperity. And third, ensuring peace and stability. Although not all of Latin American countries border the Indo-Pacific Ocean, the importance of a free and open international order, which is a basic principle of FOIP, is not limited to the Indo-Pacific region, but should be shared by the entire world, including Latin America. We'd like to strengthen our cooperation in this area for the sake of supply chain stability as well. And in addition, now the Biden administration is taking a cooperative stance with the Latin American country. I believe this is the perfect time to work together with Latin American country to maintain and strengthen a free and open international order, just as Japan has been working with the United States to realize FOIP in Asia and the other regions. Based on this idea, last November, together with Ambassador Donner, who is participating in this panel today, Japan and the United States. Japan, United States, and Brazil launched a framework for a trilateral dialogue aimed at building a free and open international order based on common values such as the rule of law. Third, from the perspective of promoting multi-layered supply chains, I'd like to touch on the strengthening the economic partnership between Japan and Latin American countries and green and digital cooperation. In the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, we are becoming deeply aware of this risk of relying on just a single source of supply chain. Unfortunately, there is also the risks that this corona crisis will be used to justify the protectionist policies that have been observed in many parts of the world before the pandemic. In order to mitigate such risks, we need to create a multi-layered supply chain, maintaining free trade. From this perspective, Japan needs to further strengthen its trade and investment relation with not only with Asia, but also with Latin American countries. Japan has been steadily promoting free trade and market economy in recent years and has already concluded many bilateral free trade agreements, investment agreements, tax conventions, and so on with Latin American countries. With the entry into force of so-called TPP-11 at the end of 2018, and the trade agreement between Japan and the United States at the end of 2019, plus RCEP so-called recently signed, Japan has been establishing a high standard economic rules. Just 10 years ago, as the director for Economic Partnership Division of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in charge of free trade agreement, I was struggling to promote these free trade agreement negotiations. Now, facing a free trade zone covering 80% of the world GDP, formed with Japan as its hub, I feel we are in a world completely different from what it was when I was a director 10 years ago. In order for the global economy to recover after the coronavirus pandemic, we must transform our economic structure towards a post-COVID-19 world. Then how are we going to achieve this? I believe the key is there are two keywords. First, to go green, and second, to go digital. The Suga administration, which took office in last September, gives great importance to digitalization and responses to climate change. And we promote cooperation in these two areas with Latin America. Regarding first going green, Japan declared that it aims to realize carbon neutral society by 2050. And last December, Japan adopted the Green Growth Strategy. In particular, hydrogen is key to a carbon neutral society. And Japan is equipped with advanced technology for hydrogen production and power generation. Japan also has a great deal of experience in storage battery technology as well, which is essential for the realization of 100% electrification of automobiles. Latin American countries, which are rich in hydroelectric power, wind power, and natural gas, are expecting cooperation with Japan in these fields. And detailed study on this issue has already started. In addition, Japan will contribute to making rules and standards pertaining to the digital economy. Japan has already been taking the leadership in rulemaking for data-free flow with trust, so-called DFFT, and it's led the global effort in this area by launching the Osaka track on the sidelines of the G20 Osaka Summit in 2019. In addition, Japan and Latin America have a history of cooperation in the field of ICT between not only government, but also private companies on both sides. This cooperation has been built through the introduction of the Japan-Brazil type digital terrestrial broadcasting system to Latin American countries almost 15 years ago. And we would like to further promote cooperation in the digital field based on this. Last month, Minister of Cooperation of Brazil visited Japan in spite of difficult circumstances under the coronavirus crisis. I understand in Brazil, the bidding procedures for 5G will start soon, and Japan intends to actively cooperate with Latin American countries in the building up of 5G network expected in the time to come. Until now, I have talked about 3 points: the basic relationship between Japan and Latin America, free and open international order, and the economic partnership, green and digital cooperation. Japan has a cooperative relationship with Latin America in various fields, and irreplaceable assets such as the trust and the personal ties that we have cultivated for many years. On the other hand, the global pandemic of the novel coronavirus and the rise of emerging powers are putting the international community to a historical period of instability. Anticipating various new challenges and opportunities, such as response to the pandemic, security issues, digitalization, and climate change, we will continue to build new relationships with the Americans. So thank you very much, Eric. I stop here.
Well, Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for those terrific comments. You laid out a very impressive agenda of cooperation. You put forward a vision that I think most of us, if not all of us, would subscribe to very easily without reservation, and you did so clearly and with great sense of what the possibilities are. I really want to thank you for that. I want to thank you more broadly for your leadership on these issues. They are very difficult and they affect all of us, but to have somebody with your background and prominence in the position you are helping to direct this effort, I think is very, very important. I was particularly taken before, as we're migrating the panelists now to the session, I was particularly taken, Mr. Ambassador, by your comments about the Indo-Pacific region, and I wonder, just to put this on the table and for the whole audience, I wonder if we can't begin to think about not just the Indo-Pacific, but the Indo-Pacific, Latin America, and the Caribbean region, particularly on trade and supply chains, and so it would be Indo-Pac-LAC. No, Indo-Pac-LAC. I think we should begin to talk about it. We have to, bring in the countries of the Pacific Alliance and the CPTPP and all of these into a bigger strategic framework, just as you laid out very appropriately. So I want to thank you for that. We have lots of questions. We'll come back to you, but let's get to the panel again. So our panel is just a terrific group of speakers. Again, I'm not going to do them justice by any introductions because we want to get right to the substance, but their biographic information is available on the chat. You can take a look there if you care to see it. We have 4 great speakers, and we're going to start in order with Rob Strayer, who's the Executive Vice President of the Information Technology Industry Council. After Rob's presentation, we're going to go to Dr. Jerry Haar with Florida International University. After Jerry's presentation, we'll go to Ambassador Márcia Donner Abreu, Ambassador of Brazil, who has the ambassador has already mentioned her in terms of the Japan-Brazil relationship. So we're going to hear more about that, and then we'll wrap up the panel with Ambassador Julio Fiol calling in from Santiago de Chile. So with that, Rob, let's turn it to you for your comments, and then we'll just take these sequentially, and then after all of the presentations, we'll go to the Q&A. Ladies and gentlemen, Rob Strayer.
Great. Thanks, Eric. It's a privilege to be here and to be with so many people from Japan and Latin America, as well as here in Washington, D.C. for this discussion. It's also very much an honor to be on a panel with the other ambassadors and government officials. So I appreciate being included in this esteemed group. Let me talk a little bit about level setting of where we stand today. The economic and political relationship between Japan and Latin America is truly strategically important. I work for a trade association now after leaving the State Department called the Information Technology Industry Council. It has 80 members of which are the most innovative companies in the world. 80 of them are headquartered around the world, and they include 3 in Japan, Fujitsu, Toshiba, and SoftBank. For ITI and for the relationship between Japan and Latin America, the digital and technology aspects couldn't be more important. The evolution of digital technology and digital ecosystems are going to be critical to building shared prosperity and addressing challenges of poverty and inequality, and ultimately improving standards of living in Latin America. One of the positive upsides, I guess, of the COVID crisis has been there's been significant effort and energy put into improving digital inclusion because it's been necessary for commerce to continue, for people to communicate, and for students to be educated. With the recovery, though, there's an opportunity for accelerating some of those nascent achievements in the areas of broadband infrastructure expansion, providing access to and use of digital payments, leveraging e-commerce, which has become essential for so many businesses, and embracing cloud services and other digital infrastructure, and finally for governments to transform their information technology. These are going to enable citizens, businesses, and communities to reap the benefits of increased digital connectivity and inclusion. Japan can be such a key partner in this. Japan has shown tremendous leadership in the areas of privacy, e-commerce, and digital trade, in the area of cybersecurity and 5G and connectivity, as well as international standards. A few of those the ambassador just touched on a few minutes ago. To level set a little bit in the baseline of this, Japan is very involved in Latin America, with, by our count at ITI, more than 3,000 Japanese companies having a presence in the region. And Japan exports and does substantial amounts of foreign direct investment in the region, most concentrated in the technology sector. In Latin America, the good news is that by 2020, approximately 66% of Latin Americans were regular internet users. But on the downside, only about 37% of firms in Latin America were using the internet in their supply chains, and less than 20% had deployed some kind of digital sales channel so they could take advantage of e-commerce. That means that small and medium enterprises, who represent a very important segment of Latin American economies, are still challenged by connectivity and having access to digital and e-commerce platforms, which on the other hand means that there's tremendous opportunity for growth by appropriate government policies that can expand the opportunities for micro and small and medium enterprises to get online and take advantage of digital infrastructure. I'd briefly like to highlight roughly 6 ways where I can see some more robust cooperation between Japan and Latin America. And those are the areas that I highlighted just a minute ago where Japan has truly been a leader in digital policy. The first area where there could be more cooperation is on data governance and privacy. As the ambassador just noted, when Japan had the presidency of the G20 in 2019, during the Osaka track of that, they announced a agenda item of digital free flows with trust. That built on work that Japan had already been doing in this area, but it's really an effort to foster greater international cooperation and to facilitate increased data flows across the globe, but to do so with trust. and to establish interoperable, transparent, and rules-based systems for enabling the cross-border transfers of data that are so essential for all future digital commerce. Several countries in Latin America, including Brazil, has just passed a law, but other countries are debating new laws on data privacy and data regulations. Other countries include Panama, Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, and Chile. In those laws, it's important that we see mechanisms that allow the international transfer of data and the availability of transparent, non-discriminatory mechanisms. And importantly, they need to be interoperable with one another. Every country doesn't need the same type of protections around data, but they need to be set up in ways that the data can be easily transferred across borders. And one of those the United States, Japan, and many other countries have worked on for some time is called the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum's Cross-Border Privacy Rules, or CBPRs. Those are important mechanisms that Japan has been a leader in helping to establish in the APEC region. The second area of tremendous cooperation is cybersecurity. You just can't have digital technology without the trust of businesses and of consumers in that technology, that their data and the services being provided are reliable and not subject to compromises of availability or the integrity of the data or the confidentiality of their information. Japan has been a leader working closely with the United States. I personally worked very closely with my Japanese counterparts at the Foreign Ministry when I was at the US State Department on cybersecurity policy around the globe with many countries. Japan has adopted a flexible and adaptive approach to cybersecurity, one that Latin American countries are modeling as well. The Organization of American States has a cybersecurity program that's very active in cybersecurity best practices. And in recent years, we've seen a number of countries take major steps forward to enact cybersecurity laws and regulations. Those include Mexico, Chile, Brazil, and Colombia. Importance here is having flexible frameworks that largely rely on voluntary standards being employed by industry and that are flexible enough to adapt to new challenges and not be rigid and stifle future innovation. The third area where there can be tremendous cooperation is on 5G, the fifth generation of wireless technology, and other advanced technologies related to the supply chain. Here we're talking about the actual components of those networks. Those need to be supplied by trusted vendors. Just as in the area of cybersecurity, consumers and businesses need to have confidence in the availability, the integrity, and the confidentiality of that information that's going to flow over these networks. There's great presence already of trusted providers in Latin America, including Nokia and Ericsson building out the 3G and 4G networks and now 5G networks. And there's also important contributions by many American companies and very importantly by Japanese companies. For example, Fujitsu is playing a very important role in building out the next generation of 5G networks, which are open architecture networks that allow more flexibility in allowing for different parts to be plugged into the different points in the architecture of what they call the radio access network, which is the wireless part closest to the user. So tremendous innovations happening through the work, the research and development, and then the business relationships with Japanese companies. And they will continue to play an important role in the build out of networks in Latin America. Very important news happened last summer on this front too with supply chains in the agreement that Chile forged with Japan to commit to having the first trans-Pacific fiber optic cable extending from Latin America to Asia. They're going to be using Japanese companies to build that to lay that fiber optic cable and for many of the components that are needed to build out that network. By using those Japanese companies, they're having the most trusted providers in the world build out that network for them. The fifth area for cooperation, the fourth area for important cooperation is on global standards. For some time, the United States has worked closely with all of its Latin America partners through an OAS organization called the Inter-American Telecommunication Commission, which feeds into something called the International Telecom Union. For those not familiar with those organizations, what they do is they help establish global standards for telecommunications and for the over-the-top technologies, the services that ride on top of those telecom networks. as well as ensuring the open and interoperable internet. So it's very important that the countries of Latin America work closely with their North American partners, as well as Japan, which has been so closely aligned in those overall efforts at the ITU and in the coordination that happens in CTEL. The fifth area, there can be greater cooperation on digital tax. In the last couple of years, we've seen a number of proposals for unilateral digital tax measures. Those are measures that tax revenues related to digital in ways that they are not taxed in the physical world. Those have a significant chance of undermining global tax norms, causing further fragmentation of international tax regimes, and disrupting the ability for investments and partnerships to be forged in the digital space. There's an ongoing effort, the OECD, where Japan is a key player in those discussions, to establish a multilateral consensus-based solution to evolve the revenue structures for countries to deal with the digital world, but it's important that they be done globally and not just on a unilateral basis. And the sixth area where there can be very much more cooperation, and one where you can't foot stomp enough the importance of, is in the area of digital trade. Japan and the United States forged the U.S.-Japan Digital Trade Agreement, which was groundbreaking about a year ago. Japan's also been very active in the G20 and the G7 on digital trade issues, and through the Comprehensive and Progressive TPP, as well as through a number of Latin American agreements. Japan and Latin American countries are responsible for driving global convergence on commercially meaningful commitments related to digital trade. And core to that commitment really is that you can move data across borders with minimal restrictions, and that governments do not require the localization of data or the computing facilities. That's going to be so important as artificial intelligence comes about, as companies seek to do more investment across borders. It's really going to be important that Japan and Latin America continue to work in a number of forums to achieve those meaningful commitments. And on the multilateral front on digital trade, the WTO, World Trade Organization, has begun an effort the last couple of years to establish an e-commerce agreement. And there, Japan has been one of the key leaders there, along with a couple of countries in the Pacific region, as well as there's been active participation by Latin American countries, including Mexico, Brazil, Chile, Argentina, and Colombia, to move forward on that e-commerce agreement, which would really broaden market access and establish more openings for e-commerce, as well as ensure that practices for regulating new technologies don't stifle innovation. So it's really important that the WTO keep moving forward on a strong rules-based international commitments for the 21st century digital economy. So to conclude, there's tremendous opportunity for Japan to work with Latin America, as well as with allied countries, to see the best practices put in place in a number of these digital policy areas. That's going to lead to further growth of the economies of Latin America, and for there to be benefits that accrue to the citizens across the region as well. Thank you, Eric.
Rob, that's terrific stuff. We gave you a tough assignment and you hit a home run. So thank you for that. Congratulations. And we'll come back to you for a lot of these really important ideas. And a lot of this is kind of developmental over time and international negotiations and all this. But one of the things that could really contribute to the agenda overall is if we can find a way to get Brazil into the OECD, which you mentioned. That would have a huge effect across the region in terms of standards, and the previous U.S. administration prevented that from happening. So let's see if the new U.S. administration can find a way to make it happen. I think that would be a real contribution to these ideas. Thank you, Rob. Really good stuff. Jerry Haar, to you. Let's open up your screen and hear from you.
Okay, thank you very much, Eric. It's a pleasure to be here with you, the ambassadors. Rob gave an excellent presentation, and I'm glad that he closed it on such a positive note. I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see where we have it.
Okay, well, Jerry, why don't we do this? Let's put you back in the queue. Let's
good idea.
Yeah, let's go to Ambassador Donner Abreu for a word from Brazil, and we'll get this figured out. Don't worry, stay with us. And Ambassador, let's go to you for your presentation. Thank you again for joining us, and with apologies for the lateness of the hour, but you're good to join us from Brazil.
So Very great to be here. I liked very much the presentation by Strayer. Looking forward to Dr. Haar, of course, and to Ambassador Fiol. But let me go. And I fear that I will give you a presentation that is very different in content and in inspiration from the one that preceded me. Because I'm coming back to a different world that will touch a little bit on connectivity, but not a lot and not as much as Strayer that focused very much on the digital revolution. That obviously is there to stay. I think my weird sounds. My presentation will mostly focus on the shifting dynamics of the supply chains worldwide. As we all remember, the little research I did when preparing for this presentation was that obviously those global value chains and supply chains that were very much in fashion when I was at the WTO between 2012 and 2018. They expanded very rapidly from the early 1990s to 2008, more or less. And then this expansion suddenly stopped. The value chains were there, but they stopped growing as much as before, basically coinciding with a contraction of global trade, global growth, and international investment that followed the crisis in 2008. Now, it's obvious that the COVID pandemic contributed to expose even more the vulnerabilities of concentration of value chains, but the reassessment of business models based on value chains preceded COVID, basically on the wake of rising labor costs in several places, technological innovations allowing for production be held closer to or less disseminated around the world, and obviously geopolitical rivalries that increased certain risks associated with value chains. With the pandemic, we saw very much the risk of excessive concentration. We saw it in a very particular sector that was the medical supplies and protection equipment, of course. Remember the battle for respirators, remember the battle for EPIs and EPIs in Brazil, but individual protection gear. And it seems so dated now because now we have an abundance of supply. But we are battling for vaccines, which are slightly more complex, I would say, but still very lots of concentration of the production, manufacturing of the active pharmaceutical ingredients. And we are seeing again, at least in my part of the world, we are seeing again that this can, yes, be of a huge concern for governments because Brazil, for instance, will be able to produce locally our active pharmaceutical ingredients by the end of this year. But the end of this year is a lot of time to wait when you are having infection rates as we are now facing in my country. So more on that later. Anyway, by May, June last year, the talk of the day was reshoring, nearshoring, regionalization of value chains. And obviously, this is a trend that will have some weight for the future that businesses are planning. Everybody will be hedging for at least a little, balance of value chains disseminated in different regions of the world. So not to be like a victim of a problem of some shortage of supply in a specific area. I remember very early in the pandemic, the automotive industry in Brazil one day said, well, next week we are going to stop producing because we don't have parts anymore. And then China reopened and the parts came and the industry never had to start fully. Although, of course, there were impacts, economic impacts related to the distancing and the production was reduced. Now, For Brazil, we see opportunities in this shifting dynamics and in the idea that global value chains, global supply chains will be reorganized. Obviously, we plan, as I suspect many other countries plan, to attract part of these supply chains that are relocating and to increase our participation. I think Eric mentioned right in the beginning that that Latin America should join the bandwagon of value chains, and this is very clear for us. We are parts of the supply chain in several, many industries, but value chains per se, the idea that you import to export, a little less so. Production in Brazil, we export a lot of inputs for several supply chains in the world, but as per industrialization, importing, we mostly import to produce locally, and the local market consumes most of our industrialized production. But anyway, we are focusing at this present time, you can move, not as much in the value chain per se. Two, please. Next. Thank you. I'm far away from my computer, so I have help. We are focusing on a reform agenda that would be, in any case, a precondition for us to move up in the global value chains, in the general value chains, and would be a precondition for us to become more competitive and to raise our productivity. So the reform agenda that has been very deeply embraced by the current administration in Brazil involves several different movements. One is evidently the domestic regulation reform. Better environment for business, better environment for investment, promoting innovation, reducing barriers. It's more or less known for everybody that does business in Brazil or with Brazil, be them Brazilian entrepreneurs or foreign investors here, that we have a high cost derived from several aspects of our structural realities. We have high tax, we have high tariffs, our state is still very expensive. So we need a number of things. We need privatization, we need state reform, we need tax reform. The tax code in Brazil, like the tax code in the United States some years ago, is extremely complex. So it takes really thousands and thousands of hours for regular businesses to comply with their obligations in tax terms, not to mention the weight of the tax per se in the business revenues, if you want. Simplifying and reducing the tax burden would be two objectives that go hand in hand. Trade liberalization, reducing the average tariff of Brazil would be very significant. Adhering to more modern, if I can say so, trade disciplines, most of them reflected in those new agreements that are coming forward in the world, opening the economy, triggering competition in strategic sectors also are very crucial to us. You can move, Carlos. This implies a lot of work that has to do with Brazil domestically, our Congress, our business leadership, our society, but it implies as well working with our partners abroad, working in several different avenues to consolidate these reforms. So attracting investment, for instance, we have this ambitious investment partnership program that is not only directed to foreign investors. But I would say that 40% of our investment partnership program today corresponds to foreign investment in Brazil. It's not a surprise that the main investor is China, but other countries, Japan, the United States, are important investors in the IPP. And almost 130 assets will be put to auction this year, 2021. The government expects to reap 70 billion dollars in new investment. So this 68 billion probably wouldn't come once everything together, but they would be scaled according to the needs of the different investments that are acquired, the partnerships that are created. We also have a very ambitious trade negotiation strategy. You know that we concluded with the European Union last year, with EFTA, the European Free Trade Area. We are holding negotiations now with Canada, South Korea, Singapore, India, and we have just concluded an exploratory dialogue. We called it terms of reference of the future negotiation, to be more explicit, with Vietnam, and we are still in talks to conclude this exploratory dialogue of these terms of reference with Indonesia. ASEAN, actually, Hayashi talked about Indo-Pacific, and to be very clear, as Japan is a very key partner of Brazil, as the United States is a very key partner of Brazil, India is an important partner of Brazil, evolving partnership, I would say. Both Japan, India, and the United States are in the Indo-Pacific group called the Quad. More securitarian, but a lot of ideas. The free and open Indo-Pacific concept involves a lot of ideas for cooperation in areas that go well beyond the security and strategic concerns. And we are very much focusing now. It's one of my very recent projects, very much focusing on ASEAN, at the epicenter, of course, of the Indo-Pacific, not only the trade routes, but also this shifting dynamic of value in supply chains, given RCEP, given the CPTPP. Some countries of the ASEAN are part of the new comprehensive partnership, but all of them, of course, are at the center of RCEP, that also offers great perspectives for the region in terms of shifting and moving value chains around the region. Another element that was mentioned by Shreya as an exciting possibility, I think it was Shreya, it was not Eric, said OECD. OECD accession for Brazil is the opportunity for us to lock in our commitment to the reform agenda. We already follow a number of the disciplines and the normative instruments of the OECD. More than a third of them, we are totally in compliance. The process of acceding to the OECD means that you are going to put yourself totally in compliance with the OECD best practices and regulations and codes and so on. So for Brazil, it represents really a big step forward in terms of completing the reforms we have committed to. And finally, I would like to mention, as Hayashi mentioned before, the Japan-US-Brazil exchange. It's a strategic dialogue that is based on our common values of democracy, market economies, shared prosperity based on capitalist values, and a number of areas where Josbe, we call it Josbe, intends to work, relates directly to elements of our conversation today. Value chains that are resilient, that may be relocated for resilience purposes, for hedging against excessive concentration, quality infrastructure, connectivity. The digital revolution has everything to do with that. Secure networks for connectivity is so important now that we are reaching the realm of Internet of Things, the artificial intelligence, and of course, sustainability. You can move. Then I think no, you move too quick. Come back one slide. Yes. So talking a bit about the potential for Brazil-Japan relations, I take it that our colleague from Chile then will concentrate more on the Pacific side of Latin America, but I'll talk mostly about Brazil. We have such a long-standing and strategic relationship with Japan. 125 years we commemorated our 125 years of diplomatic relations in 2020. We have, as you know, extraordinary human bonds because we have the biggest Japanese community outside Japan is in Brazil. We also have 30,000 strong people community in Japan, completing now 200,000 people, and completing now 30 years of Brazilian immigration to Japan. On the basis of these intertwining communities, we have strong business network, of course, and we have a very strong complementarity between our two countries. We are powerhouse basically in natural resources, agriculture, mineral resources, energy resources, and Japan has two things that are very important to us: capital for investment. Japanese financial concerns handle more than $6 trillion ready for investment, not only in Brazil, of course, but ready for investment around the world. And Japan is also a leader for so many years now in technology and innovation, and Brazil has good capacity in terms of research facilities, research institutions, business innovation, installed business innovation. So we are able to work with Japan in this area as well. So these two things complement very much our capacity to provide Japan with resources that they, of course, are major importers. Japanese FDI in Brazil is important. Japan is the 5th biggest investor in Brazil. And curiously enough, last year, investment Japanese FDI in Brazil grew for the 3rd year in a row, although it decreased worldwide. So Japan exported less investment to the rest of the world, but increased the portion of investment that came to Brazil. This is something to be commemorated in our case. And interesting enough, this investment didn't go only to the traditional concerns of traditional areas of investment, but went also to innovative projects. Japan has an important, the SoftBank Group, of Japan has an important fund for innovative projects in Latin America. Mainly in Brazil, the investments have been channeled so far. And many of these investments came to some of our unicorns. We have 14 of those these days. Oh, this may look small if compared to Japanese or United States, but for Brazil, it's a lot. And most of these unicorns obviously involve digital platforms, fintechs, sharing economy, real estate, delivery services. So all of this is part of this connectivity and digital revolution that is becoming much more important these days. Pandemic or not pandemic, I think everybody will agree that even when the pandemic leaves us and we are all vaccinated and all ready to go about the normal, regular life that we knew before it, the digital changes that the pandemic brought to us will be there to stay. Imagine in terms of economy that he provides to, all sorts of concerns, diplomats. Of course, most of our work was done presentially before the pandemic. Today, most of our work is done remotely or virtually. We will still have the presential the presential meetings, but much more of what we did, much of what we did before will be from now on possibly conducted virtually. If you can move, I will go out pickier, I hope, on the traditional supply chains that we have had with Japan. Agriculture would be, Brazil being Brazil, the first value in supply chain that I mentioned. We are a top food exporter and an agricultural powerhouse. This is no secret. But this is not only, this has to do with our natural endowment, but not only that. This has also, and a lot, to do with scientific research, technological innovation. We multiplied our productivity 5 times in 50 years. We expanded enormously our production without expanding so much the cultivated and occupied areas. Sustainability is part of this effort as well. And Japan was a key contributor to that agricultural revolution in Brazil. In the early to mid 70s, Japan was the major financer of a program for the development of the Brazilian Cerrado, and you can see Pro de Ser, Program Development Cerrados. And Pro Ser is the opening of our new agricultural frontier. Well, now new of 50 years, but it's not that new anymore. But still, this is where the most of soybeans are grown. This is the also cattle raising frontier. And this has a lot to do with technical innovation. And it was a project mostly financed with and in cooperation with Japan. So key partner for us in that area. Also a big importer of agricultural products, agribusiness products, fuel, food, feed, all the F's. And 63% of agricultural inputs that Japanese consume are imported. So it's a lot. And we can provide that good price, good quality, corresponding to the demands. We can do very, very precise product for responding to the wishes of the consumers. Foreign investment for this supply chain is very much in demand. The Ministry of Agriculture has the 3 I's priority. They say infrastructure, innovation, and green instruments that will help us produce more, export better, innovate. We just recently, when Minister Matagi, the Japanese Minister of Foreign Affairs, came to Latin America in early January, he came to Brazil. We were his. And one of the agreements he signed here was a precision agriculture, a kind of 4.0 agriculture that will be very key and very instrumental for increasing even more productivity in our agriculture. We are very committed to that, and Japan and our JICA and our Brazilian Cooperation Agency work on that. As I heard yesterday from the Japanese ambassador here, it may even include sustainability components. Then mining would be a second supply chain where we have expectations for, going up the value chain together, hand in hand with Japan. We have a sizable part of global reserves of minerals, key minerals, be them traditional minerals such as iron, manganese, or bauxite, or critical minerals such as niobium, or lithium, or rare earths that, contrary to what we may think looking to the name, are not very rare, are just very difficult to extract and to exploit economically. But for us to be able to extract and process and use these these critical minerals, it would be very important that we have foreign investment. And Japan, for several reasons, because they have a strong industrial presence here, many of these new critical minerals are key materials for industry. So Japan would be a key companion to go with us in adding value to this production. Also, there is an expectation of that we will need in coming years $40 billion of investment in infrastructure and processing and the mineral and the mining area. And Japan again would be in particularly a good position to come and be with us in this arena. We have an MOU also signed during Minister Bategi visit on the uses of niobium and graphene, two critical minerals for and industries in general. Graphene only multiple uses, even for cleaning water, according to my research, but still also very useful as enhancer of conductivity and very good electrical transmission capacities and so on. So that would be another opportunity for value chains. Sustainable energy is, again, a key aspect of what Brazil is doing. We are a clean energy power by all standards you can think of. 45% of our energy matrix comes from renewable sources. As per the electric grid, it's 83% from renewables. Of course, energy is not only electricity, and there's the difference. But we are far ahead of other countries in the world on sustainable generation of energy and of electricity. Obviously, hydroelectricity was very popular in Brazil, still is a very important component of this clean matrix, of this clean grid. But we also do biomass, solar, wind, anything you can think of. Now, the very fashionable thing is using green energy to produce hydrogen. So the Japanese work with with the hydrogen. They are producing pilots cars that would run on hydrogen. Hydrogen, of course, is very easy to make. It's just the electrolysis, but you need a lot of energy to do that. So if you are going to use a very modern and competitive source of energy for fuel cells and so on, but if you produce this hydrogen with dirty, I missed the sources of energy, then it's no good. But if you produce it with ethanol, for instance, this is a clean, renewable source, it evidently increases the potential of cleanliness for the energy source. I think the Australians are very interested in producing green hydrogen in Brazil. I myself talked to two different companies and heard of the investments here. Japan is a big importer of energy, is committed to zero emissions in 2050, or greenhouse gases emissions, I should say. We have the same commitment, but for 10 years later, 2060. And we can and are very competitive in sugarcane ethanol, which offers good capacity and low cost capacity for greenhouse emissions mitigation. We have been also working with the Japanese. We export ethanol for ETBE for the mix in the gasoline in Japan, but we are also working with them on the field of ethanol for aviation. Now, Kami, finally, next slide, please.
Ambassador, let's make the rest of your presentation available to people who might look for it. We still have two panelists, and we only have about 15 minutes to go. So, would that be okay with you?
Fine.
Perfect. Your comments are fabulous, and the problem is with having such great expertise available, we didn't program enough time to deal with it all.
Okay, no problem.
Mistake. No. So thank you for that excellent presentation. And for those of you who are watching, we'll be happy to make the full slide deck available to anybody who cares to see it. I know I will. So thank you, Ambassador Donner. All right, we're going to go to Julio Fiol at this point. Ambassador Fiol, to you, and we appreciate your patience for joining us from Santiago. Ambassador Fiol, everybody knows who you are. You used to be DCM in Washington, so we'll go to you at this point. Thanks for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you, Eric, and all of the members of my good friends at American Society, Council of the Americas, that I've known you from my time in New York and then later on in Washington. So I appreciate fully the excellent work that you do. For the sake of time and everything, I will make only 6 very brief points. First of all, I would like to say that for Chile, the Japanese experience has been there for a long time. The first Japanese investors came to Chile 60 years ago, basically, and were related to the salmon industry. That Chile was and still is very successful, and that's because of Japan. But recently, we are realizing that what used to be a main ingredient in the foreign policy of Japan, of ensuring supply of essential raw materials, is changing. And now we have Japan involved in renewable energies, in the case of Chile, waste management, water treatment, and other utilities, even in the information technologies, as it was mentioned. So that's the first point that I would like to make. Japan has a very wide array of ways of investing in our countries. Second point that I would like to touch is, as you may know, there is a broad cooperation platform of joint exploration activities that has been built through the years and benefited Chile and other Latin American countries. I'm thinking particularly about the work that JICA, JOCMEC, and JETRO are doing in our countries. In the case of Chile, a low risk rating has had a very positive impact, and we have investors including JBIC, and together with IDB and ADB, that have created a very important impact in Chile. Hayashi-san mentioned Alianza del Pacífico. Yes, we also believe that these kind of agreements will potentiate the interest of Japan to participate in our region. A third element that I would like to touch upon is basically effective crisis management mechanisms that include not only banking legislation, but also progressive improvement of related debt regulations and strict fiscal control. A fourth element that I would like to touch upon is we are realizing that the big Japanese companies are increasing their participation and broadening their views towards Latin America as a region. It was mentioned, Minister Motegi visited Mexico and Mercosur countries, and as far as we know, will visit the west coast of Latin America soon. Another point that I would like to touch upon is the current world economic conditions of high liquidity and low interest rates create an appropriate environment for bearing higher levels of debt for investment, but not any kind of investment. According to the World Association of Investment Promotion Agencies, where Chile actively participates, and I quote, "The actual status requires investors and stakeholders to consider new trends and dynamics applicable at the global scale in order to have long-term implications." What does this mean? Basically, what also Hayashi-san mentioned is that we are very much interested in whatever is coming and related to climate change, environmental awareness, and resource efficiency. And in that point, I would like to stress Chile and Japan, we didn't agree on it, but it is like that. We have declared our intention to become carbon neutral countries by the year 2050. Green hydrogen is an area of mutual concern for Japan and Chile. My country is betting that we can become a very effective green hydrogen producer because of the high radiation solar energy that we have, and also because of the low cost that we could produce that green energy. And we think that within the next 10 years, we can become a key player and in the market starting from there. I would like to touch a final point regarding the characteristics of the Japanese business people. Japanese business people are mainly concerned with what we would call a long-term relation. Chile has benefited from that. I can tell you that my experience as an ambassador in Japan that finished last Friday, I was assigned new responsibilities in Chile, is very clear in that sense. When you create and you develop a relationship with business men from Japan, that's a relationship that is supposed to last forever. I mean, they will be able to support you in difficult moments, and they will be there for anything that you want. So I think that's very important to consider when you are thinking about Japanese people investing in your country. Finally, I would like to say that Japan investors are the cornerstone, for a fruitful relationship on initiatives facing the 21st century, and particularly in the framework of the Paris Agreement on Environment. This is a point that I would like to stress. It was mentioned also the construction of the submarine cable. Yes, we are very much interested about the participation of Japan that can have, particularly in the technical aspects of the construction of that cable. Having said that, I will stop there. So I think we can have some time for questions and answers. Thank you, Eric.
Well, Mr. Ambassador, thank you and congratulations on a very successful tour in Tokyo on behalf of the government and people of Chile. We have heard very positive things, and we thank you for your service there, indeed. And for your outstanding comments. You know, one of the things that occurred to me as you were talking about Japan-Chile cooperation is cooperation on natural disasters in terms of tsunami warnings and early warning systems and things that both countries are truly world leaders in, and have a lot to teach, frankly, the United States and others about these issues too. So even things that we don't think about in the traditional investment scenario are very important links between these two parts of the world. So thank you for raising the points that you did. I wish we could explore them further. Jerry, we're going to give you one last shot. We understand you're back on. Why don't we do this? If you could hit the key points, and then I do want to give our keynote speaker a chance to make some final comments. I would love to extend the conversation, but we really can't go beyond the half hour. So, Jerry, to you for your quick summary, please.
Okay, Eric, thank you very much. And thank you, everybody. I've enjoyed all the presentations so far. I apologize for the technical problems. It could be WebEx, or it could be me, or it could be a combination of the two. In any event, let me get cracking. Timing is everything in life. And fortunately for all of us, the global economy is turning a corner, and we're witnessing an upward trajectory. If you take a look at this chart, Latin American growth that dropped 4.4% last year will be surging to close to 5.5% this year. Depleted stocks need replenishment. I have hand sanitizer. We're running low on this kind of stuff. And worldwide, you have manufacturing firms gearing up to take advantage of the demand opportunities and filling supply. A lot of people have postponed purchases, including travel to Chile, travel to Brazil, travel to Japan. This pent-up demand is going to be huge, and it's going to be driving all economies forward. This is moving at a quick pace. The good news, inflation is low, there's credit availability out there, and this is going to have a huge impact on supply chains, especially in what Eric calls the Indo-Pac-LAC countries of the world. If you take a look at this chart right here, this is the biggest supply chain challenges facing today. The three that, based on a survey of supply chain managers, are hiring and retaining a quality workforce, customer demands for lower costs. They want those costs down, even though they're going to be doing relatively well, and customer demands for faster delivery. Speed is everything. Next slide. Okay, on this one, they see who's ready for supply chains. In terms of readiness, This is a chart with countries from Latin America and Asia, and of these 12 countries, Asia and Latin America, along 6 dimensions. I will be sending this, or Eric will be sending this to you, but suffice to say, Chile, Costa Rica, Mexico, and Colombia score the best when it comes to supply chain readiness. Now, next slide. Okay, so let's take a look. The disruption to global supply chains, as I mentioned, is going to create enormous opportunities. Juan Cartier of SAP, quoting him, says, resiliency and agility are going to be key to managing these supply chains. Companies need supply chains that bend but don't break. So the keys to success of these supply chains are going to be integrated business planning, flexible logistics, and e-commerce. Who is most prepared to take advantage of this? Chile, Costa Rica, Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil. This nearshoring also that you've heard a lot about, this is going to be big, big, big. Next slide. Okay, the region, the Americas region can gain considerably from nearshoring. Why? Free trade agreements, proximity to the U.S. market, and competitive wages. And I'd venture to say that countries in the Pacific Rim are going to be able to take advantage of that, especially Peru and Colombia. And those Pacific Rim countries we're talking about are those facing towards Japan, which is advantageous for a variety of reasons. So this nearshoring is so attractive for companies now, including many that I deal with, because it's cheaper than both onshoring and offshoring. To give you a sense of where we are with this, with nearshoring, I have an example, a 40-foot shipping container from Mexico to the United States. 1 week at a cost of $1,800. From China, it takes 5 weeks and $4,300. So Mexico is best positioned for nearshoring, but one big caveat, Mexico has a government that is not necessarily pro-business. I won't say they're anti-business, that wouldn't be diplomatic, but suffice to say they could be more welcoming, including to foreign direct investment. Next chart. Here's where we have a thriving supply chain relationship, and you can see in the right-hand corner a very nice bottle of sake. I'm going to dive into that when I get home this evening. Maybe follow on with a little bit of Patron from Mexico, because I love tequila too. Like the lady says, in Japanese that says, I like both tequila and I like sake. Well, Japanese companies are, as our former speaker said, doing extraordinarily well in the Americas. Japanese companies in Mexico, there were 400 in 2009. There are 1,200 today. And as Ambassador Hayashi mentioned, it's automobile manufacturing where Japanese companies have a sustainable competitive advantage. They're number 4 in foreign direct investment in Mexico, but have a huge presence in Guanajuato and Aguascalientes. I personally visited the factories of Nissan in Aguascalientes. Amazing state-of-the-art technology. So who's there in Japan? Mazda, Nissan, Honda, Toyota. Also, let's bear in mind that Sony, Nippon Steel, and Mitsui are also there. Japan has a significant, important presence in the Americas region, and especially, I would say, in Mexico. Mexico is part of the CPTPP. Japan is the 5th largest commercial partner of Mexico, 4th place in foreign direct investment, as I mentioned, after the United States, Spain, and Canada. So Japan clearly in this region is benefiting in supply chains from the U.S.-Mexico agreement. Next slide. Final slide, I guess. Anyway, that's the final slide. Thank you.
Well, Jerry, you always keep these lively and on point. So you did again, and it was worth the wait. So thank you for that. Thank you for your outstanding comments. All of you have really just given us a lot to chew on, and much to my regret, we just don't have the time that's sufficient, and that's the fault of the program organizers. So we'll have to talk to him, in other words, me, at some point. But for now, what a terrific conversation. I want to bring back in Ambassador Hayashi, if he's still with us. I believe that he is. And because to give him an opportunity to respond briefly to the presentations that were made. We do have a couple questions that have come in from the audience. I'm not sure we're going to have time to deal with them, but Ambassador Hayashi, if you have a reaction to some of the comments that have been made and would care to join us for that purpose, please do so now, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you, Juan Mr. Panos. I have a couple of questions from the inspired from very enlightening presentation from other panelists. First, I'd like to mention the idea strategy for international free and the open international order. I think the Latin American countries are really like-minded countries. You may know that the index or democratic index published by the UK magazine Economist, and on average, democratic index or level of Latin American country is superior to that of Asian country. So I'm of the view that the Latin American country has a very common basis to share this idea. Free and the open international order. So with these like-minded Latin American countries, we would like to also establish our common foreign policy, which will be a very good basis for resilient and stable supply chain to us. So this is the first. And the second point is Mr. Strayer mentioned the number of digital aspects between Japan and Latin America. And I'm quite interested in developing e-commerce with Latin American country as well. For example, well, as you mentioned, I stationed in Beijing, and almost 10% of China is the first trade partner for Japan, even for Japan today. And almost 10% of our trade between Japan and China belongs to the e-commerce. And sometimes it's a B2C commerce and sometimes C2C e-commerce. So I think taking into account the distance between Japan and the Latin America, I think we can seek to explore possibility to strengthen our trade between Japan and Latin America using this new technology, e-commerce. And for that purpose, we need to improve the environment, business environment related to for example, the digital security or free and flow communication between two regions. I stop here, and I expect to have further enlightening comment from you and others. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you for that. And as the ambassador is the one who's most time limited of all of us, and he's just asked for a brief comment from the other panelists, let's take advantage of that. And so, Rob, why don't you join us, come back up on the screen, and the ambassador has asked or made a comment about one of your comments, and then we'll ask the other three panelists for very brief final comments. And then we'll wrap up. So, Rob, please.
Yeah, great. And thank you, Eric, and thank you, Ambassador. Yeah, I couldn't agree more about this importance of building more sustainable e-commerce flows of trade, more and more of global trade, both in goods, think about physical goods, but also in services being provided or going to be done through a digital mechanism. And so it's got to be secure. And we need to enable all people, Latin America, and all businesses to fully participate in that economy. And Japan and its technology, and along with the United States, are great partners with Latin America to achieve that. Thanks.
Jerry, let's go to you, and then we'll wrap up with both ambassadors. But I want to bring you in because you're also, representative of the non-government sector and might have a comment along these lines.
Yeah, I just want to mention, when we're talking about supply chain, we're talking about logistics, transportation, it's clear to understand that one needs to look at supply chains and value chains within a larger context. That's tax and regulatory policy, the role of government, it's public-private partnerships, it's a coordinated relationship which Japan, to celebrate, certainly has always had between government and the private sector. And I think if Latin America is going to improve its sustainable competitiveness where it can compete sustainably, it needs to forge closer bonds and amicable ones between the public and private sector and different entities within the entire supply and regulatory and tax and fiscal policy chain.
Yeah, and Ambassador Donner was making exactly those points, wasn't she, in terms of the taxes and some of the issues that Brazil faces. Ambassador Donner, a comment from you, please.
Oh, yes, I would like to come to the free and open international order that Hayashi mentioned. Very much agree with him that our region of the world is interested in well positioned to join into this concept. This stable and peaceful and free and open international order that we want is we will need a lot of efforts to promote shared global prosperity. And I would say that with traditional partners such as Japan and the US, we have a solid basis for mutually beneficial arrangements, taking into account all the elements that Professor Haar mentioned, Dr. Haar mentioned, elements as good governance and so on, and taking advantage of the new digital revolution. That was the good presentation also of Shreyer. So thank you very much to Council of the Americas. I think we all learned today and benefited from this conversation. Thanks.
Well, on the contrary, we took advantage of your expertise, and so we are simply a forum, and you've done all the hard work. So thank you for that. And Julio Fiol, we're going to give you the last word here before we wrap up. So to you, please.
Very, very simple. In Latin America, we need to learn a lot from how Japan does things, and particularly in the business area. I envy the interrelationship that there is between the government and the private companies, and how Japanese diplomats spend quite a lot of time of their career working and getting to know business people. So that would be my last message. I mean, we have to learn from Japan a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, an outstanding message to conclude on. And ladies and gentlemen, truthfully, all four of our panelists could have been a keynote speaker in their own right, and have been many times before joining our keynote speaker for the program. So hopefully we can entice each one of them back at some point to continue the conversation, because there's so much here for further exploration. Regrettably, we just don't have time. It's about midnight in Brazil, I believe, where Ambassador Donner is, and the day is starting in Tokyo, so we have to be respectful of our speakers' time. With that, I really want to thank all of you for joining us as panelists. I want to thank you for your insights. The topics that you laid out are very, very important, timely, and actionable, and we really appreciate that, and we'll be following up directly with a number of these activities. And to Ambassador Hayashi for your leadership again on these issues, and to all of you from the audience for joining us, for staying up late with us and having a discussion on these very important issues. We genuinely appreciate your time and attention with us as well. So we're going to wrap it up here, and again, in hopes to see all of you again very soon. And with that, ladies and gentlemen from Washington, good evening.
Thank you. Thank you.